Okay, so now let's do it one more time. And 860-8960-2429. 888855. I'm going to put this one.
Recording in progress.
Is underneath a.
I have it, okay, but I don't want him to really be that much. So I'd rather not have it here. Right. If you give him a clicker, he can. Screen share. Okay, Amanda, you can.
What about presenter?
I have Dave Guest. Is that you? Are you Dave? Is that Dave? Well, then I think you're in. Or it could be someone. Let's see. Oh no, Dave is okay. Right. Turn off your phone. Oh yeah.
Computer speaker. That's separate. That we'll get a. Check 1 2. Question. So your speaker's still on. Check 1 2. So you gotta mute your own. Check. Alrighty. So I'll be here well into the kick starting off with, I guess, maybe a half hour in.
Yeah. Okay, this sounds very clear through the speaker. Do we have other speakers that we could test?
The mic right here?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Here, yeah, like a fraction of a second later, huh?
Yeah. Okay. So you'll be speaking from here.
Okay.
I will put your PowerPoint up and in slide mode at the right time.
And I can just run it from there.
You can, it'll run there, but your note.
Yeah, no, this is helpful because you can see the slide that's
Yeah.
up and the one that's coming.
Right, yeah.
Nice,
Okay,
great.
so
Okay,
that'll be
thanks.
that. And before and after, we have a different share screen. Actually, let me do that again with the shared screen. Let me see what
Oh,
happens.
this theater is really nice.
So we're gonna do full life.
Okay, Gary, it's not quite as good because what the people on Zoom see is that.
Okay, well, would you prefer to put up a different version of the PowerPoint for
Oh,
screen
you
sharing?
could, if that's PowerPoint, you could tell it not to do speaker view
Yeah,
or presenter view.
yeah,
So this is what they're saying.
that's what they're, no, there we
Yeah,
go.
There we go, that's fine.
Okay.
That's perfect. I did look at the
Okay.
slides a bit. I mean,
Good.
it's not that my first time going through them.
Okay,
Really been mixing stuff up somewhere along the way.
you're coming through loud and clear, Dave.
Hey, long time no see. Everywhere, man. Everywhere. Hey, Barry, don't go away, man.
There's only 5 people on.
Hey, there he is. And there you are. Oh, so you're doing it.
Barry, you're muted. Barry, do you hear me?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on. So I already started the recording. I'm gonna have to take this ear thing off of out of my ear because I have a quarter-second delay and it's making it hard to speak as I'm hearing myself. Well, first, welcome to everyone who's, oh wow, we have a lot more people here. Okay, I want to thank the members of the Planet Friendly Eating who provided the wonderful food in the back there. There were, I don't know everything. Pam, can you tell us what all the different types of food that you had, and can you speak into that microphone or come here and speak, one or the other?
Okay, is it there are wonton apple pies, salted caramel cookies, and some peanut butter cups, and everything is vegan.
Okay, great. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot more roomers than Zoomers tonight. Okay, now I'd like to call on Adrian, who is on Zoom, to report on financial. Oh, actually, before we do that, I do have to go over the ground rules for Zooming and rooming because we're still not used to doing this. And I find I have to enforce this a lot and people get mad at me, but I want you to understand what we're trying to accomplish. For roomers, you have to realize that we now have 12 or more participants who are listening in from their homes, and they'll only hear you if you speak into a microphone, and they will only see you if you speak into this microphone. So that they can fully participate in this, we ask that you preferably come here to ask your questions. For Zoomers, we ask that you mute yourself, because especially if there are two of you sharing a screen, it's very natural for you to talk or make comments to each other, but everybody hears what you're saying if you are not muted. So please mute yourself. A little less important, but still helpful, if you are to front light your face and not have windows in the background, because it's rather glaring, but since there'll be a lot of screen sharing, it's less of an issue. So that we make sure we allow everybody to ask their questions, we ask the Zoomers to raise their hand electronically if you are able to do that, because it's harder with screen sharing. We can't actually see you raise your hand. The other thing that you can do, and we encourage you to do, and Amanda will be monitoring it, is if you can put your question in the chat, then we'll make sure that we get it asked, and we try to do first come, first serve on that. So those are the room and Zoom ground rules. And now I'll turn it over to Adrian for the membership and treasurer's report. Please unmute yourself, Adrian.
Okay. Good. So bank balance as of the end of May was 10,548. I see a typo here, actually. Bank balance should be as of 30 of April, 11,000. So we had 13 new memberships or renewals in the last month. We had some donations. Mostly thank you to Carol Weed, who did the collected a bunch of money at the film nights, and that's brought in to our balance here. We had quite a lot of expenses, mostly due to the sort of an annual expense with renting the room and so on and so forth. That was about $900 and some odd dollars. So that was the major part of the result of the expenses. We can go to the next page, please.
Sure.
So as of now, we have 139 currently active members. At the end of last year, we had 198, 117 have renewed. Thank you very much. We've also had 22 new members, which is really good. And there was a grace period that's long since ended now. If you happen to be listening to this, you can renew now. Just go to sustainablerossmoor.org/join or leave a check at the in our box at the gateway. Okay, any questions?
Okay, Adrian, thank you. We heard you loud and clear in the room.
All right.
Good. And I presume also online is, yes, okay, good. And now for our featured presentation, Carol, were you going to, Gary, before you come up, we want to introduce you properly. So I'll call on Carol to introduce you.
Gary doesn't really need my help to be introduced, but I do want to ask a few questions of those of you who are in the room, and maybe if you can answer on Zoom by putting your information in the chat. How many people here have ever been to Martinez, California? Oh my gosh. Okay, that's nearly 100%, like 99%. Okay. How many people have been to visit one of the refineries in the north here? We have one person. Okay. Two. All right. And how many people have ever been to Crockett or Rodeo or, okay, hands went up and hurt. My goodness. Okay, well, my assumptions about who you are wrong, and I'm really impressed. So we're now going to hear a speaker who's going to speak right to you, Gary Hughes. You can see on the slide some of his CV, and it'll be obvious after he starts talking where his knowledge base and his focus has been.
Okay, I'm going to have to do a new share. So to bring up his slides. Okay. Okay, Gary, and if you click on the slide with this, possibly with, no, that's not working, but if you click on there, it should go to the next one. Okay, and now, and also these should work. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Carol, and thank you to everyone for making time to be here. My name is Gary Hughes, and it's really an honor to be joining Sustainable Rossmoor. And I have a presentation that I was asked to put together to share with you some insights about bioenergy. And the question that we're working with is bioenergy really a climate transition, or is it a trap? Really quickly, to speak a little bit about Biofuel Watch. I've been working with Biofuel Watch for 4 years. We're admittedly very small organization, international in scope. One of the co-founders is in Glasgow in Scotland and the other in Vermont. But they had asked me to start working with them. I was looking for work as well 4 years ago because they really recognize California as being globally important in terms of the development of environmental and climate policy. Really important to Biofuel Watch is promoting citizen engagement and getting people involved in the decision-making processes around the approval of industrial bioenergy projects and other land sector matters. Technically, just to recognize that we are under the fiscal sponsorship of the Global Justice Ecology Project, which is a 501c3 organization based in New York, actually, but the people who run Global Justice Ecology Project are people that I've known for many decades. As a matter of fact, I worked with them quite closely when I was at the University of Montana doing my master's work in the environmental studies program there. I was part of an organization called Native Forest Network, and Global Justice Ecology Project splintered off, and I've stayed in touch with them. And Global Justice Ecology Project was one of the founders of the Climate Justice Alliance. So we work really strong on climate justice issues, and we come at our work with a strong frame around the protection of human rights as well as the environment. So the purpose of this presentation this evening, and I'm going to try to be very cognizant of time, so once I get started here, I'll probably start rolling pretty quickly. But we really wanted to address this question about how bioenergy in many different forms is being celebrated as a means of responding to the climate crisis. Our argument is that many decision makers are taking refuge in the political convenience of basically converting fossil fuel infrastructure to bioenergy infrastructure, and that the climate benefits are elusive, and that the public health and environmental harms remain really quite severe. So we'd like to unpack some of the technical language in this presentation and try to help people come away with this with at least a stronger understanding of, namely, really two major forms of bioenergy that are manifesting themselves here in California. So one of the things I want to talk about is the woody biomass, the utilization of woody biomass, or we speak about biomass energy. And the big trend here is the conversion globally of coal-powered power plants to burning biomass. And this is having really tremendous impacts on our forested landscapes. And also we're seeing a really alarming rise in a very harmful means of doing forestry or looking for forest or wood products is through the expansion of monoculture plantations. And just to flag, for instance, that the situation in Canada with wildfire has been getting a lot of attention lately. What hasn't been getting attention is a majority of the most severe wildfires are burning in areas that have been massively replanted. And these areas are burning, there's like literally just a carpet of even-aged trees, all of the same species. And it creates a homogeneous landscape that really is susceptible to very serious wildfire behavior. And so that's what we're seeing in Canada. And it's actually a root cause of some of the most severe wildfires that we've seen in California as well. So I'm going to come back to the woody biomass issue to close the show. But what I wanted to focus on first then is a bioenergy issue that's really become a major issue here in the Bay Area and in California over the last couple of years. And this is the whole transition that is being promoted by mostly fossil fuel majors of converting the petroleum refineries to being refineries for the manufacture of liquid biofuels. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on with the conversion of refineries to biofuels. So, setting the stage a little bit, the Bay Area is home to one of the most significant refining sectors in the Western United States. As a matter of fact, one of the most important refining sectors on the Pacific Rim. And here in the Bay Area, there's 5 refineries. We can work our way from, kind of the coastal side of the bay inland. We have Richmond with the Chevron refinery, Rodeo with the Phillips 66 refinery, and then the PBF, or now MRC, been getting a lot of attention lately because of the Thanksgiving incident with the toxic release. It's the ex-Shell refinery in Martinez. And then there in Martinez as well is the Marathon refinery. And then across the water is the Valero refinery in Benicia. 2 of those 5 refineries are converting to liquid biofuels. And at this point in time right now, have already begun really, very strong production of liquid biofuels. The Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo and the Marathon Martinez refinery. I'd like to focus really strongly on the Phillips 66 refinery conversion issue. For this presentation, I'm really not going to discuss the Marathon Martinez refinery conversion issue as much. I don't want it to seem like that's not an important issue, and in some ways it might even be closer to home to folks here, but the Phillips 66 one has really been a really important issue to address because they aspire to have the largest liquid biofuel refinery on the planet there in Rodeo. So we have this shot, this kind of Google map type shot, and you can look straight down on the Carquinez Strait, and there you can see the marine terminal for Phillips 66, and you can see, you know, Highway I-80 going through there and the refinery there, and you can see then as well a bit of a tank farm at the upper end of that facility. And this is the tank farm that in October of 2019 suffered a catastrophic fire. Now, what's really interesting to note about this, to set the scene for our discussion about biofuels, is that this fire was of ethanol. So ethanol is a liquid biofuel that's made largely from corn. It can be made from sugarcane, but here in the United States, it's made from corn. But I wanted to really start with these photos. These are photos that I snapped from my television when this incident happened. And people, someone called me up and said, there's a fire up there. And so I turned on the TV. Fortunately, it was getting coverage. And I just want to really kind of start with this to drive home the point that I think in a lot of instances, biofuels are presented as being very benign. It's just, hey, they're just making it from vegetable oil. It can't be, that bad for you or anything. But when they make the liquid hydrocarbon that can be burned as fuel, it actually still burns like fuel. And so you can have all of the same sorts of environmental hazards in terms of particulate matter and NOx and other hazardous elements in the air. So I wanted to share these photos right away to kind of dispel this myth of biofuels as just being this benign, natural type energy source. And what we've seen with the conversion of the Phillips 66 refinery is a real crisis in climate governance. And one of the things that's most kind of infuriating about this is the way that the regulatory agencies have really just let Phillips 66 go ahead and do whatever they wanted. And what they want to do, and what they are doing at this refinery, is they're converting it, for the most part, from processing petroleum into diesel and gasoline to processing a whole host of other feedstocks. They'll speak about animal tallow, which is basically, like the rendered fat from animal slaughter. They'll speak about used cooking oil, like the oil from making French fries, which is actually a phenomenally sustainable feedstock, except it's so constrained. There's so little of it. There's not enough of it to make the quantities of fuel that they want to make. So what Phillips 66 is really using, and this is where I might have to ask for a glass of water. I forgot to bring my water bottle with me. What Phillips 66 is really relying on now is soy oil. And the thing about making liquid fuels from soy is it's really inefficient. You have to use a lot of it to get the fuel you're looking for. And then the other thing that the authorities have not wanted to address, and that Phillips 66 has tried to hide from the public, is it actually takes a phenomenal amount of hydrogen to make a liquid fuel from soy oil. And the hydrogen is secured by the reforming of fossil gas or natural gas. And so it takes a huge amount of fossil fuel to make a liquid biofuel from soy. And it also makes the processing, the manufacturing process, as carbon intensive or even more carbon intensive than making liquid fuels from petroleum. Thank you. So as this project was subject to environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, there's a whole slew of groups that weighed in really strongly. And unfortunately, our concerns were not taken into consideration. The projects, both Marathon and the Phillips 66 project, were approved by the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, and now they're being litigated. Now, whether a judge in Martinez is going to rule against the companies or not, I think it's a little bit of a long shot, but I want to make sure that it's been a very contested process, and that from our point of view, working in the grassroots, we don't think community interests have been heard. So this is why I say there's a kind of a crisis in climate governance, because there's still harms that are threatening the communities. And once again, the climate benefits are dubious at best. And one of the reasons why the climate benefits of making liquid biofuels from soy is so dubious is because what it takes to get the soy. And so soy is essentially a high deforestation risk commodity. We know that soy agriculture is one of the sources of deforestation in the Amazon. We also know that soy agriculture is really closely tied to the livestock industry. And so technically, what this is called is indirect land use change. And this is the idea then that basically it's not that I have to buy the soy from the producer that deforested land to plant the soy there. It's that the market elasticity is such that if there's increased demand for soy for feedstock, for fuel, for feed for animals, or food for humans, that there's going to be demand and more demand for soy. And that's just going to keep pushing the model further and further out into the pristine landscapes that are biodiversity rich, carbon rich, and that are basically, really kind of holding the planet together at this point. So the risk of losing forests on a global scale because of the conversion of refineries to making liquid fuels from soy is really very high. And it's been proven again and again, and the science is getting stronger and stronger around this risk, but the authorities have been really reluctant to go there and understand exactly what the full impacts are from using these feedstocks. So as I was saying, there's a really strong connection between soy agriculture and the livestock industry. And then the other thing that really needs to be understood is that because of the massive expansion of the use of genetically modified soy, essentially Roundup ready soy, there's been a lot of public health issues from the massive applications of pesticides for the cultivation of soy. So the communities that are living in these areas that are dealing with really large-scale monoculture soy agriculture are dealing with very severe public health threats. I haven't spoken at all about palm oil. Palm oil and the production of palm is one of the great motors of global deforestation. And here in the States, perhaps we're not using palm oil directly for making fuel, even though there are issues of, for instance, fraud, where virgin palm oil is being sold as used cooking oil. What we see more here in the States is the problem with the market elasticity again, that as the fuel producers start soaking up all the soy commodity, that soy which was used in foods or other products needs to be substituted, and a lot of times the substitute product is palm oil. So that the use of soy for making fuel here in the United States is also driving the expansion of the palm oil model. Here's a graph that was made by a colleague of ours, Greg Karras. And if you look at the green line in the graph, that's the reference. That is the total land area of Indiana. And then we can see the bar graph where there's 4 different refineries here in California that are converting to making fuel from soy or making fuel from food, 2 of which are the Phillips 66 Rodeo refinery and then the Martinez refinery. And you can see with these different commodities, with the soybean oil, the canola oil, or the distilled corn oil, that to make as much fuel as these refineries in California are proposing would require a land area that's greater than the state of Indiana. And the other thing that we really want to push back on is a narrative that's often promoted by state authorities at the California Air Resources Board, where there is a replacement of the petroleum-based fuels happening with the increased manufacture of the liquid biofuels from products like soy. And it couldn't be further from the truth, because the refining sector here in California does not only provide fuels for California, they're also providing liquid fuels to the entirety of the Pacific Rim. Some people talk about California being the gas station for the Pacific Rim now, and that there are phenomenal amounts of exports. Up to 30% of the refined fuels that are made here in California are being exported to foreign markets. So the growth of consumption of, for instance, biofuel, such as it would be called renewable diesel here in California, is actually not replacing the petroleum-based diesel. It's just that that petroleum-based diesel is getting exported now to Mexico, to Chile, to Korea, to other countries. So the political convenience of converting this fossil fuel infrastructure to bioenergy is threatening land, it's threatening communities and ecosystems. So one thing Carol did ask me to make sure that I left you with some language here. I had mentioned renewable diesel. There's really two biofuel products that could come out of this Phillips 66 refinery and the Martinez Marathon refinery as well. One is renewable diesel. This is a drop-in diesel fuel. This is, really different from the old school biodiesel, which would have to be blended with petroleum diesel to make it work, or you'd have to totally modify your diesel engine. With the renewable diesel, this drop-in diesel fuel, you don't have to modify your diesel engine at all, and you can just use straight up renewable diesel. They could still blend it with petroleum diesel if they need to, but 100% you can use renewable diesel in your diesel engine. The other product I really like people to keep their eyes out for, though I'm not going to really get into the aviation questions at all, is called sustainable aviation fuel. So the aviation sector is betting a lot on trying to convince people to keep flying, because they're telling you that we can make flying green. And one of the ways we can make flying green is by using what they call sustainable aviation fuel, which is basically an aviation fuel made again from a commodity like soy. But no matter what, they would have to blend that with a petroleum-based jet fuel all the same. I'm not going to get into the aviation issues here, but just to caution folks, understanding that really the evidence is showing that there's no faster way to fry the planet than flying, which is a dilemma, for all of us. So anyhow, we're in a crisis of global forest governance. There's an increased push for commodities that are high risk deforestation commodities. And the push for bioenergy is making the situation worse. But it's not only the liquid biofuels. And this is where I want to pivot now to speaking more about the woody biomass issues. Now, this photo is from the redwoods. I love sharing this photo, even though I'm not really going to talk about the redwoods, but just for people to know, if you take a look at those bare earth spots there, those are the clear cuts that continue to happen. This is Green Diamond Resource Company land in Humboldt County. And one of the reasons why those units are so bare is because there is a drive to basically scrape these units clean, because all of the woody material that they can get out of their logging is being used for biomass energy. They're just burning it up there. There's actually at the mill in Scotia, if anyone's ever traveled up 101, there's actually a biomass energy plant there, and they just burn it in chip form or whatever form they can. Okay, but there's a more sophisticated and rather dangerous woody biomass bioenergy threat in California right now. This picture is of a wood pellet plant in North Carolina. And right now, the southeast of the United States is under a huge amount of pressure with the production of wood pellets, which is the conversion of largely forest wood trees into a densified wood pellet product. And it is then being exported, for the most part, to Europe right now, to the UK, to be burned in converted coal power plants. But right now there's a drive to bring this wood pellet manufacturing industry to California. And I want to talk about this proposal right now. It's by a company called Golden State Natural Resources. So who or what is Golden State Natural Resources? So this is where you get into California county politics a little bit. There's an affiliated entity of the Rural County Representatives of California that's called Golden State Natural Resources. The Rural County Representatives of California is a not-for-profit organization that's made up of some 40 rural counties in the state. So there's a sister affiliated entity to Golden State Natural Resources called the Golden State Finance Authority. They're a joint powers authority. And they also happen to have the lead on the environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act of the Golden State Natural Resources proposal. Modoc County, Inyo County, Butte County, Humboldt County, Siskiyou County, these are all the counties that are represented on the 5-member board of directors of Golden State Natural Resources. Golden State Natural Resources, this is their own words. This is from one of their pamphlets. They're proposing to build 2 facilities for manufacturing wood pellets, and one in Tuolumne County, one in Lassen County. And then they want to manufacture 1 million tons of wood pellets a year and export it out through the Port of Stockton now. Really quickly, make sure everyone knows what wood pellets are. This is the manufacturing process where the wood material is dried and pulverized, and then pounded together again into a denser pellet, literally pellet, looks like a rabbit pellet. If anyone here may have had experience with home heating with wood pellets, it's just, quite a bit more benign, perhaps, than the massive amounts of wood pellets that we're talking about here for substituting for coal. But this is it's a huge commodity sector now that's growing rapidly around the world. I want to get into Golden State Natural Resources and what their plan is. They want to site and construct these 2 new wood pellet manufacturing plants, one each in Tuolumne and Lassen counties. Their feedstock plan is to draw trees of each and every size from at least a 100-mile radius around their new facilities. They would draw this from private and public lands. The United States Forest Service is very deeply involved with this. 1 million tons a year, which is a very, very large amount of wood pellets. If you can imagine, in the Southeast right now, in all the states there's probably around 8 to 9 million tons of wood pellets being produced every year. So right off the bat, California is looking to step up and match 10% of all of that production of an industry that's been established for decades there now. The facility in Lassen County would be one of the largest facilities in the world, manufacturing 700,000 tons of wood pellets a year. And they want to ship these wood pellets by rail or truck to Stockton. Just a flag that we did organize in Richmond when we first heard about this project, and that the port operators, the 11 terminal operators in Richmond, have already told Golden State Natural Resources that they don't want anything to do with the project. And the goal, of course, is to export these wood pellets to global markets. It could be Korea, it could be Japan, it could be the UK, it could be South America, Chile. There's lots of coal-powered power plants around the world that are trying to convert to biomass because it's considered a climate-friendly approach to generating electricity. The status of the project is that it is now opened up to CEQA review again, the scoping. They had done scoping last fall, and we got pretty good response from groups responding. And then we got the community of Richmond, that one of the reasons why Golden State Natural Resources isn't operating in Richmond is people in Richmond were like, well, you didn't do any scoping with us. No one asked us how this project could affect us. So we're a little bit leery of what you're up to now. And that's why now Golden State Natural Resources has reopened the scoping, which is the initial step on environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act. And they're focusing explicitly on Stockton now for their export operations. There was a really long delay. Golden State Natural Resources had suggested they would already be on into like having a draft environmental impact report prepared and ready for the public, but they've had to start from scratch once again, which we argue really kind of exposes some of their, well, for lack of a better term, like discrimination against especially the poor communities. Next Tuesday, the 20th, there's going to be a virtual hearing on Zoom where people can express concerns, or with scoping, you basically want to tell them what they need to examine when they do the environmental impact report. And then there's a deadline on June 30th for written comment. So that's the stuff that I'm going to come back to as far as the action-oriented part of our discussion here. I've got about 5 minutes left here. I think I can get through my remaining slides in 5 minutes. I'll probably go pretty quick, but then we can open it up to some questions. So I want to talk a little bit about the environmental and public health harms that arise from the manufacture and transport, storage, and burning of wood pellets. So again, there's a lot of effort sometimes to paint bioenergy as being benign. Oh, it's just natural, okay, no worries and everything. But the actual manufacture wood pellets presents a lot of air quality threats. The storage of wood pellets presents a lot of public safety threats. There are stories of, fires that burn for 3 months once they get started. They're very difficult to put out. It's really important to recognize that burning wood pellets for energy is very carbon intensive. And actually there's a whole bunch of carbon accounting sort of loopholes that are used to make it sound like it's quote unquote carbon neutral. But this is all a question of playing with time, because it could take decades, if not centuries, for a forest to grow back that's been harvested to make for wood pellets. So any carbon neutrality is way out off in the future. And what we need when it comes to climate action is action now. And then the forest ecosystems. And this can be a really interesting topic here in California. I probably won't get into it as much as I might like, as wanting to recognize that there's a very severe wildfire issue in the state right now, that oftentimes there is an obfuscation of what the cause or what the root causes of that wildfire problem is. The hysteria, as it were, around wildfire is being used by Golden State Natural Resources to suggest that we need to, on a massive scale, treat our forests. But what we're seeing in these last couple of years, in the aftermath of these big fires, is that there's a lot of very heavy-handed forest management happening out there, post-fire salvage logging, or they will talk about vegetation management or fuels management. But again and again, when we're able to get a look at these sites that are being subject to these management plans, we're finding that the forest is being left as a moonscape. It's being scraped clean. And it's this idea that, well, we can control wildfire if there's no fuels there to burn. But if there's no fuels there to burn as well, then there's no habitat, there's no nutrient cycling, there's so many harms from this level of aggressive logging. I grew up in a timber family, and I know there's more gray areas sometimes here than black and white, and I'm certainly not one to say that we shouldn't be harvesting trees at some point for wood products. There's clearly a need for that, but we need to really understand how our concerns about wildfire can be manipulated to basically continue with the same business as usual that got us into this mess in the first place. And really quickly to point out too that burning woody biomass is more damaging to the climate than even burning coal. Now, I'm not saying that we need to keep burning coal, don't get me wrong or anything. The imperative really is for us to move away from combustion, but the argument that burning biomass somehow is a pathway to decarbonization is really, it's erroneous. Okay, so this dangerous characterization of burning biomass as a renewable energy is something that we all need to be conscious of and push back on. And that's what's happening on a global level now. So civil society and grassroots climate justice organizations around the world are coming together to counter this trend. And really, a lot of times it's the people who are living next to, for instance, these plants that are converting from burning coal to biomass. Some of these neighborhoods are still dealing with tremendous air quality issues and other industrial threats to their public health, to their health, to the air quality and such. So we're trying to respond to those communities, but then there's also forest-based communities that are seeing their forests being ravaged, as it were. There's a timer for me to finish up, to provide the feedstock, okay? So I only have a couple slides left, and I want to be available to folks. I left some of my business cards up front, and as well, I also left a little pop-ed book that I think is really cool about climate false solutions. We call it Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. Encourage people. I didn't bring enough for everybody, but my business card is up there, and if you want to follow up on some of this information, we can make sure it's there. But I mentioned Golden State Natural Resources being in scoping right now, and there are ways to get involved with the scoping. So one thing you can do is if you go online, you can just goldenstatenaturalresources.com. That's their website. And on their website, they're legally required to do this. On their website, they have the information about scoping. So you can find the information about the virtual hearing that's happening next Tuesday night. And at this hearing, the company will make a presentation about their project, and then they will open up to public comment. And even if you don't plan on making public comment, it could be a really interesting event to listen in on and hear what people have to say, hear what the company has to say, hear what people who make comment have to say. We're definitely organizing people from around the state. We're working really hard to do outreach in Stockton, in Lassen County, Tuolumne County, Humboldt County as well. I have really strong Humboldt County roots. We're very concerned that Humboldt County is leaning into this project so hard that threatens harms to communities outside of the county of Humboldt. It's like, that's not really fair here, even, you know, and they're not being transparent about what it is. So you can join this virtual hearing on June 20th at 6 p.m., next Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And then also, if you feel so inclined, you can write public comment. But my call to action is, if it's possible, to try to listen in on this scoping hearing next week, just to hear what is shared. And if you really feel, you know, compelled, your turn would come up to be able to share a comment. So this last slide right here is just some of the graphics. Biofuel Watch is a part of several, a whole handful, really. I have so many responsibilities in different international networks, but two of them that I really want to bring to people's attention. One is called the Global Forest Coalition. It's more than 90 community, indigenous, and grassroots organizations in more than 60 countries around the world. And then we're also very active in what's called the Environmental Paper Network, that actually has a very strong focus on the pulp and paper sector. But what we've found is that pulp manufacturers now are increasingly incorporating really large scale biomass burning like facilities within their larger facility, if I'm explaining myself correctly. They're burning a lot of woody material, calling it renewable energy, and then either selling carbon credits for it or being able to sell it as renewable energy. And what we're seeing is a really aggressive expansion of the biomass energy sector within the pulp and paper sector. And flag the pulp and paper sector is one of the case studies in environmental leakage. For instance, here in California, again, my strong Humboldt County roots, there used to be two really large pulp mills up in Humboldt Bay, and fortunately they're gone for those of us from Humboldt. But all that really happened is that whole sector just moved to the global south. And so now there's massive pulp production in Chile, in Uruguay, in Brazil, and the communities down there are, it's really pretty sobering when you see the kinds of conditions that they're living in. So it's an international theme. I hope that I've been able to show how there's a couple really major global trends that are manifesting themselves here in California, in the liquid biofuels and the woody biomass. And then I hope also just, you know, at least one call to action, kind of, there's lots of things that everyone can be doing out there to, you know, advance greater awareness of what we need to do around climate stuff. I shared just one example, maybe it's of interest to you. So thank you so much for your time, for inviting me to be out here. As I said, I have some business cards out front. Feel free to grab one of those. It's got my email on there, and drop me a message. And yeah, thank you. That's my presentation right there.
Gary, thank you so much. And now we're opening it up to questions. If you do have a question, if you can, in the room, if you can come up to here. If it's you have an accessibility issue, we can bring a microphone to you, but the Zoomers won't hear you. And for the Zoomers, if you can put your question either in the chat or raise your hand. In the meantime, I'm going to just do a little housekeeping here. Is there a question first in the room? Okay, could you come up so people can see you? And why don't you come over here? There you go.
So that was a great presentation, and thank you so much for that, and the incredible research you do. So So thank you again. My questions are, could this, because they're in what, Susanville? They're trying to locate this in Susanville? Is that about where it's looking like?
It's Beaver, actually, so it's.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So getting that biomass down here, and really the only terminals are going to be Oakland, Richmond, and that's about it.
Stockton is the one that.
Can they get it on a large enough ship there to?
That's a really good question.
Well, I'm just questioning, does it have to be, is Richmond their bottleneck? Because ships can only be so big in Stockton.
Yeah, there's a definitely.
Yeah. well-
Yes, I think I got it now.
Okay, they
Yep.
can hear you. If you come here, they can see you as well.
So the question about this bottleneck with the port operations is really, I think, a very important question. And that's, for instance, that is why we organized in Richmond. Our idea was to kind of try to close the gate to them a bit. And Richmond was their preferred site because exactly what you're saying, that it's a deep water port and you can get the bigger ships in there.
Now, can could this company, this Golden State, whatever, try to have the biomass converted in Richmond? Like you were saying, the biofuels are being to liquid, but could they decide, well, let's just burn wood pulp in the pellets in Richmond?
Yeah, no, there's no real threat of the biomass being burned in the Bay Area right now. The other thing is that you will hear a lot of woody biomass proponents talk about making liquid fuel, even aviation fuel from woody biomass, but it's really not scalable. Like you can do it on small scale, but we've never yet seen a project do it at scale. So we don't really think that that's possible either. Well, the real issue that they're trying to do is to export these wood pellets to the global markets.
Now, the one of the earlier slides, you had you had soy and corn, and there was one other part of that chart.
Canola oil?
Canola. Rapeseed. Yeah.
Rapeseed, yep.
So on that, those have to be coming, California isn't a major, that's not one of their major crops, in my understanding. Alfalfa, nuts, fruits, vegetables.
Yeah, no, those vegetable oils are at this point in time all coming from the Midwest.
By rail?
By rail. Yeah, so so for instance, the Marathon Martinez refinery is being served by rail to Stockton and then barges taking the soy to the refinery there in Martinez. But I do want to drive home the point that if more and more soy from the United States is being used for making liquid fuel, it still means that soy is needed for other products. It could be, for instance, even as simple, even though it's complex, that if China, which previously was buying lots of soy from the United States, is no longer buying soy from the United States, especially because the United States is using more of that soy for fuel, and China has to get that soy from somewhere. And that's when they're seeing
Going to Brazil.
and exactly to the Amazon and such. And so that's the idea of indirect land use change and the market elasticity. So when we increase demand for these commodities, whether it be for feeding animals, for feeding humans, or for making fuel, that increased demand pushes the frontier of this agricultural model further and further into the pristine landscapes. Indonesia for palm oil, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, all of the Amazonian countries for soy. It's really a very serious crisis, and we still haven't seen really any success other than in Brazil for a short while. There's actually a moratorium on expanding the soy. So it's a really serious issue, because as well, if we were to lose the remaining forests on the planet, well, that's, like a carbon bomb. So it's not just the climate, it's, yeah.
Well, thank you for your analysis.
Oh, yeah,
I
thanks for,
appreciate that.
yep. Here we're,
Okay, is there a Zoomer? Yeah, okay, well, right, that's fine. I want, people have been putting things in the chat as well, and so Anyway, Amanda, is there? It's on. It's on.
The question we have is from John Anderson, and he wants to know if it's still on the table to dredge a channel to Stockton.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I know that the United States Army Corps of Engineers was really trying to move forward with that project to make it more accessible for basically the super tankers to get back to the refineries back there, and even to Stockton for the movement of like liquid fuel commodities. And my understanding is that is totally off the table now, though, that the United States Army Corps of Engineers is, and it wasn't, just the climate activists that pushed back on that. There was a lot of, community groups trying to protect the Delta that were really concerned about that.
Why don't you take in Adrian's question?
I've asked him to unmute.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Adrian, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. Great talk. Thank you very much. I have a question about if we don't allow these wood pellet plants here in California, does that just mean, though, that they'll be set up someplace else, like Chile or Brazil, and that would be worse because they would not be regulated as well as they are here?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair question. Though I'm a little bit more cynical about the quality of the regulation that we have here in California.
Yes.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. I guess what I would say at this instance, though I haven't really researched this completely, and this is something of an off the cuff kind of comment, is that I really believe that if it is indeed necessary that there be some scale, and I'm very cautious about this, but some scale of, quote unquote, vegetation management to mitigate the wildfire danger that we're seeing. For instance, there are tens of thousands of acres of monoculture tree plantation across the landscape in California. Now, you'll never hear industry or the government talk about the plantations because they don't want to admit that they clear cut the forest really badly and then just planted it all up again with one species. But those plantations do need treatment. Otherwise, we're looking at really, again, catastrophic wildfires. We've seen it happen here in the state. And so what many people have tried to suggest then, though I'm skeptical of the climate benefits or the carbon sequestration benefits, though, is that we should really, instead of be making a wood pellet that can be burned from that material, that we look more at what can be done in terms of mass timber or composite, construction products, that there's ostensibly more and more innovation happening right now in terms of what can be done with that type of, not quite as commercially valuable, wood. So, but I definitely agree in a lot of ways with what you're saying about how we shouldn't be offshoring the environmental harms from California. But I don't want to say, okay, let's just build lots of wood pellet mills here. I think there's a deeper response that's needed for that.
Yeah, great.
Is that Adrian? Yep. All right.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. So,
look who's here.
Nick, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Gary. How are you?
Hey, Nick, how's it going? Right on.
Good.
Good. Making it.
Good to see you. My name is Nick Weinberg. I manage the renewable energy projects at Phillips 66's Rodeo Refinery. So I did want to put a quick caveat out to the group that I did try to call the number for Sustainable Rossmoor and email you guys. So I'm not coming out of nowhere to ask for a few minutes, just to maybe give a little bit of my perspective on our project. I'll speak to just just the Phillips 66's Rodeo Renewed project for a minute or two, and let the rest of Gary's talk. I thought it was very informative on a number of issues. And Gary and I have spoke at different forums and different arenas together. I'm a native of Walnut Creek. I'm raising my kids in this area as well, so happy to have it here. So I heard a lot of potential issues out there from Gary's talk, but not a whole lot of solutions. So we're proud to be producing a lower carbon intensive product that can be used today in medium and heavy duty vehicles, which is really what that diesel product is geared for. And that's really using CARB, the California Air Resources Board's calculation. That's not my calculation. And just to kind of counter a few claims, the transportation that's needed to get the feedstock, that's included in that 65% reduction. The indirect land use change value, that's assigned, that's calculated from Lawrence Livermore Lab, from a number of UC Berkeley scholars. They include that indirect land use change value in that calculation. And also the hydrogen needed is also included in that calculation. So just wanted to throw that out there. In terms of the permitting process, as somebody that's been along for the entire permitting process for our project, there are 3 major permits you need to get to construct in Contra Costa County, and that entire process has gone on for about 31 months. So I want to put it out there for the county that certainly been an intensive permitting process along the way. A couple of other items out there that renewable diesel processing operates at a lower pressure than our current production that we have from hydrocarbon processing for a heavy gas oil hydrocracker. So from that aspect, it's really important from a flaring and safety standpoint. We're gearing about 70% of our capital investment on the project towards a pretreatment unit. So, that's an important aspect there to really show that we're geared to lower carbon intensity feedstocks. Gary rightfully highlighted that soybean oil, not necessarily soy oil, is the highest of all the carbon intensity from the feedstocks. Now that's still 55 compared to 100, which is the carbon intensity of petroleum diesel. But there are much lower carbon intensity feedstocks, use cooking oil, tallow, Caratina oil, and other oils out there. And so that's what the pretreatment is geared towards. So I just wanted to mention that. And of course, distillers corn oil, why corn oil sounds a little more scary. Distillers corn oil is a byproduct of ethanol production out there. And the last one for the clarification, I did have to throw in the chat.
Do you have a question for our speaker?
I'm going to conclude with a question, I promise. The last one I just had to throw in the chat out there as we started, that the fire that Gary showed at the beginning was, of course, not from the Phillips 66 refinery. So I while I was listening, I'd be remiss as a Phillips 66 employee if I didn't clarify that. So as I kind of wrap up here, from a company that's producing transportation fuel for family wage jobs in Contra Costa County, the cleanest and most regulated industry out there. My question to Gary is kind of what's your solution for medium and heavy duty vehicles if it's not a lower carbon intensity fuel?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I really appreciate your professionalism, and thanks for making it and throwing me the question. First thing, I do want to flag, though, that you're relying on the California Air Resources Board's rules around assessing the, quote unquote, carbon intensity impacts from indirect land use change. But to note that the California Air Resources Board this year is embarking upon a whole project to amend the low carbon fuel standard, and they've refused to entertain the necessities of reviewing their methodologies for assessing indirect land use change. So the California Air Resources Board, as Nick is suggesting, is really a very big part of the player right here. And they're actually not, from our perspective, taking the necessary steps to really take a close look at this issue of indirect land use change. Now, in terms of solutions, like I just said right there, I'm, really attentive to how, for instance, with the woody biomass issue, that if it is indeed that we need to be addressing like forest management issues, that we be looking for innovative approaches to what we can be doing with that material, and that burning it is not the right answer. And when it comes to transportation, there are some really major issues at hand, for instance, with aviation. But one of the things that we're really trying to say about mobility is that it's not just one type of mobility or the other that needs to be addressed. that we need to have a more holistic approach to how we address our mobility. And the simple fact, for instance, that we still can't take a train from Los Angeles to Mexico City is a traumatic situation. This is, how are we going to get out of this? Because we need to be flying less. We need to be flying less. We will need to make some very serious questions about how we address these issues of transport and heavy transport. So I think it's a much more complex thing than which fuel we put in the motor. That said, I'm not going to just come up here and say that electrification is an easy answer. I am not one who's just going to wholeheartedly say, oh, we can just electrify anything. So we're facing some really serious dilemmas, is one of my answers to your question right now, Nick. And I don't have a full, complete answer for you. But I do think that, for instance, you're showing up this evening is really one of the ways that we're all going to be able to get to the heart of these dilemmas. Because if we don't talk about these things and we don't have transparent, frank conversations about them, informed conversations about them, then we're never going to be able to get to where we need to be going. So I really appreciate you showing up, Nick. You have great style. Thank you.
Thanks for addressing that, and do appreciate we're all for affordable and reliable energy. As somebody that had to fight through the brownouts in California, that's important on that aspect. And if my daughter hadn't gotten sick, I would have been there in person, because I hate to miss some of those treats that were spelled out at the beginning of this meeting. Those sounded really good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So let's see. Dave did not have his.
He's unmuted.
Okay, very good. Okay. Oh. Well, okay, then how about if we just unmute and ask this question, or you can ask the question for him.
This question is from Dave Casey. He's asking, isn't the effort to provide biofuel for transportation in conflict with California's and the US goals for clean EVs?
Well, yes, I think there is a conflict right there. As a matter of fact, we know that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, for instance, made a goal of being diesel free by 33, it's supposed to be 2033. And again, these projects kind of are in contrast with those objectives for sure. So yes, the push towards biofuels does not necessarily jive with the goals for electrification, but again, I'm very sober about suggesting that it's going to be as easy to electrify our vehicles as many interests are suggesting.
Carol, do you have a question? Okay, why don't,
shut out somebody else's.
right, no, why don't you come up?
I'm still puzzled by some of the really basic terminology. I don't understand what's sustainable about sustainable aviation fuel, or what's renewable about renewable diesel, or some of the other things. So basically, I think you're saying that's just complete greenwashing and there is nothing renewable or sustainable about some of these things that the adjectives are applied to.
Well, I mean, I think it's really clear in this instance that the use of the term renewable and renewable diesel and the use of the term sustainable and sustainable aviation fuel are more marketing tools than anything else. And this is why, again, I think, our organization and our, affinity group, people working on these issues, we're really shy about suggesting that, that supposedly clean energy is just clean. So we really believe it probably behooves all of us to step back a little bit when we use energy and just understand that we need to be thinking about using less energy altogether. And I think one of the biggest errors that the environmental movement ever made was to try to convince people that the consumption of certain products could be good for the planet. And I really think that that is an error, because if we're consuming something, telling ourselves that it's good, and we're not thinking about what the ramifications are, we're just kind of perpetuating this, guinea pig situation that we're in, running on a wheel, round and round and round. So I really tried to, step back a little bit from these terms that classify, new energy projects as being sustainable or renewable, and to be really a lot more sober with ourselves about what our energy use really means.
So on Zoom, JPGM provides a link to a Sunflower Alliance, is it talk that talks about this in greater detail. So the Zoomers have that, the Roomers don't. I will try to pull that out and include that in the follow-up email that goes out to you, so that you all have access to that source. I can let's see, click it on here. Yeah, this is the source, but I see it's going to be hard to write it, but I'll try to do that. Okay, are there any other questions that were from the Zoomers? Any other questions from the room? Okay, well, Gary, thank you very much. I'll start the gallery for a minute, just so that we can see the people that are there. I see a lot of people are not in on their video. That's fine. So let's go back to the to these slides, and I'll go to the first thing I'll do is, so I think okay, the newsletter. Pam, can you speak to the newsletter here? And I think I'm just, see if I can do this right. Pam, is that
I don't actually have any news on the newsletter. I hope you're all getting it. If you're not, it probably means you're not an active member. And so if you send $20 to Adrian, you'll get reinstated and you'll get a newsletter every week. It tells what meetings are happening during the coming week. It has news from some of the committees. And then there's a bulletin board that's sort of a catch-all for everything else. And if you have anything that you want in the newsletter, we just want little blurbs. We don't want articles. No matter how wonderful your article is, that can go in the forum section of the website. But any other little items that you have for the newsletter, send them to me at gerizzo@aol.com. I think I'm the next one too.
you are?
And then the legislative committee. We started the legislative committee a couple months ago. There are a few of us who identify bills that we think would be of interest to Sustainable Rossmoor. We study them, write them up, bring them to the steering committee, and if the steering committee endorses them, then we write letters to the legislature and we contact our local legislators. And you're probably getting occasional action alerts asking you to please contact our legislators, so that they know how Sustainable Rossmoor feels about these issues. I put a few of the bills up there, but 11 of the bills that we have been following passed out of the first house and have moved on to the second house. So we're feeling very successful. And thank you for all the calls that you have made to Senator Glazer and Assemblywoman Bauer-Cahan. We think that it's important for them to know what we're thinking. And if you'd like to join us, we're happy to have you. We don't have meetings. Basically, if there's a bill that we're not following that you think we should be, you can tell us about it and we can help you figure out how to write it up and present it to the steering committee and get you involved in that process. Or if you really don't want to be involved in the process, but you want us to follow the bill, we can work that out too. So let me know.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, and now we're going to, Marcia, is going to speak about the Sustainable Leveraging Committee. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Barry. We've put together a committee that we're calling Sustainable Leverage. And what we're going to try to do is to contact like-minded organizations that we can then have more affiliation with them. So one of the things that we're working on is we're going to check with 350 Contra Costa and 350 Bay Area to find if there are environmental groups that are part of their membership. And if they are, then we're going to see if we can work together with them. So if you have any ideas, that would be great. At our meetings, if you are working with some sort of affiliation, just give us a call, check with me, and we'll be able to see if we can do that. And then we do have our Google group, and if there's something that you put on there that you think might be worth to everybody, we'll look it over and we'll get back to you. So that's where we're at. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention on sustainable leveraging is that we created a new membership category called External VIP. And these are the presidents of local environmental groups and their communications head, who sometimes it's called the newsletter editor, sometimes it's just called communications, or sometimes it's their vice president. But we put them, when they provide their information, we put them on our mailing list. They're on there for up to 3 years, whatever their term of office is. It doesn't cost them anything. The idea is that they get our mailing list information, and if they feel that that particular mailing would be of interest to their group, they can then communicate it to their organization as well. So, for example, if there is a call to call Steve Glazer or on a particular bill, that information can get multiplied. We can leverage it to not just our members, but also to other environmental members. That's the idea there. Our Walnut Creek Climate Plan, I think this is Carol. Okay.
This bar chart comes from the website of Contra Costa Climate Change Leaders, an organization that's been in existence for over 10 years. And they usually make the chart once a year and repost it. This one came out very quickly after the first one because there's been some major changes. You will see that Walnut Creek, it doesn't make any difference. What did I do? I pushed the wrong button. Okay. If I go like that, will it show up? No, okay. Too simplistic. But Walnut Creek is the 6th one. And the last time this appeared, just a few months ago, we were number 5. So we're sinking further and further behind. And I just thought, if you aren't going to participate in the event that Gary mentioned on June 20th, our own Walnut Creek City Council is going to be voting on their climate action plan that has taken them 3 years to design. And funding it is a real issue. So having a lot of good ideas is one thing, but then they have to find funds. So they need to hear from us, whether it's actually on the 20th or by letter or by phone before or after, that we want the ideas funded. And there are some that you may notice that are missing. So please stay involved with our city council. It makes a difference right here in Rossmoor what's going to be done. Is there anything else? And this is the film that we're going to be showing, not this month. We don't have a film in the month of June. It's an exception because another club reserves Peacock Hall on the second Wednesday when we usually have our film. So next month in July, we're going to be seeing a film that's 1 hour long called The Power of Big Oil. It's actually 3 sections of a documentary, and we're going to be watching the third one that focuses mainly on the bridge fuel, the wonderful bridge fuel of natural gas. And it's going to be followed by a short 15-minute video on hydrogen. So we'll be talking about 2 other issues that are relevant to our refineries. I think that's the end of my presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. The EV charging, so Brad and I have been doing some work on the EV charging area. Actually, this slide is from, I believe it's from last month. We've had some progress since then. We have had some meetings with MOD identifying where energy sources are. We have some electrician companies that can provide some estimates. We want to get some estimates for what it would cost to bring level 2 chargers to selected entries, parking lots for those who express interest. And then we'll start talking about how it gets funded. We're also looking, we're always on the lookout from different grant opportunities, but there's no obvious winner or obvious one the way there was when we brought the 30 level 2 chargers to Rossmoor. That one only cost GRF $1,000 a charger for each level 2 charger, which was a real bargain, and we're glad we have that. A lot of people are using those chargers. But so we're looking at this because of the large adoption now of EV vehicles. There's places at Rossmoor that don't really have convenient ways of charging near where they live. So we're trying to develop some solutions for that to present to the mutuals. Right now, we're primarily working with Mutual 3 and Mutual 70. And that's all I have to report on that right now.
Hey, Barry?
Yes, Brad.
Yeah, let me just add one item on that, and it's fairly hot off the press. It's not a huge win, but it is movement forward. And this morning, Third Mutual had its annual meeting, and afterwards, during the organizational part, they agreed and voted to make their EV charging committee a permanent standing committee, as opposed to an ad hoc committee. And the board member was chosen to lead that is our own Laura Lee Barbaria. And so I think it should give us a little bit more ability to move forward with Third Mutual on EV charging.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
Okay. That's all that we have tonight. So the question that we're always asking ourselves is, how will we rededicate ourselves to sustainability for our grandchildren? So that's the parting question for you all. And we welcome your participation in any number of sustainable activities. So thank you. I will